3 years ago, my name was etched into the marble wall of our firm's downtown office. Isaiah Merritt, Director of Strategy. And just like that, overnight it vanished. They removed the plaque without a word, just like she removed me from her life. And I let them. No fight, no exit speech. I disappeared like a chapter she skipped in her story. So when I showed up last Friday night, clean suit, fresh haircut, and a new title from a rival firm, I didn't expect her to notice. Honestly, I didn't even expect her to be there. But there she was, clutching a champagne glass like it could anchor her, standing under the chandelier, surrounded by people who never knew the truth. Her badge read Delaney Merritt, still using my last name. She hadn't seen me yet, but I saw her. And for a second, I forgot the storm she left me in, until I remembered why I walked away. 3 years ago, Delaney told me she needed space to figure herself out. She said it so casually, like she was canceling a gym membership. No signs of guilt, no flicker of conflict. But when I walked into our bedroom that night, her phone was unlocked on the dresser, and the text on the screen glared like a wound. "He'll be gone this weekend. We'll have the whole house." It wasn't even her first lie, just the one that burned away the rest. I didn't confront her. I didn't rage. I left quietly, took the dog, the truck, and a single suitcase. No goodbye letter, no confrontation, not even a slammed door. I just erased myself. The kind of silence that makes people wonder if you were ever real at all. The next week, I changed my name in the system, resigned through legal, and moved states. Not even her closest friends knew where I went. And now, 3 years later, I stood 10 feet away from her at a corporate gala. Neither of us was technically supposed to attend. Me as an unlisted guest of a VP. Her as a last-minute panel fill-in. Neither of us on the printed guest list. Life's poetic like that. She turned, our eyes locked, and in that split second, beneath her practiced smile, behind her styled hair and glassy eyes, I saw it. Recognition, then confusion, then it hit her. Tears didn't well up instantly. She tried to blink them away like it was a trick of the light. But her grip on the glass tightened, and she didn't even notice when it tilted. The bubbly spilled down her wrist and soaked into her sleeve. Still, she didn't move, and I didn't smile. I didn't smirk. I just nodded, calm, polished, like I'd never spent a night sleeping in the back of my truck trying to convince myself she hadn't broken me. But I had broken, and I had rebuilt. And now, for the first time since I walked out that night, I wasn't the ghost anymore. She was. Delaney didn't rush toward me. She didn't scream or stumble. But the shift in her body was undeniable, like someone had hit pause on everything around her while the room kept spinning. Her colleague, a brunette with an overly rehearsed laugh, tapped her shoulder and whispered something. Delaney barely blinked. She just stared. I moved first. I walked toward the terrace doors, calm and collected, like I was just stepping out for air. Not a glance back, not a single invitation. I just knew if she wanted to talk, she would follow. And she did. A few minutes later, the door clicked behind me, and I felt her presence before I even turned. "It's really you," she said. Her voice was cracked porcelain, too soft for someone who used to command entire rooms. "I thought you were dead." I didn't answer right away. I let the silence stretch long enough to remind her I owed her nothing. Not a greeting, not an apology, not a single explanation. "Where did you go?" she asked. "No one knew. You vanished." I turned, finally meeting her eyes. And this time, I saw what 3 years of guilt does to a person. Not the kind of guilt that screams. It was deeper, the quiet kind. The kind that crawls into your bones at 3 a.m. when no one's watching. "I went where the lies couldn't reach me," I said simply. She opened her mouth, then closed it again. That was Delaney in a nutshell, always searching for the right thing to say, but only after the damage had been done. "You didn't even try to fix it," she whispered. "You just left." Those words made me laugh. Not loud, not cruel, just bitter and hollow, like a sound escaping from somewhere I didn't know still existed. "You cheated," I replied. "You made plans with him in our house. You told him when I'd be gone. And then you want to talk about effort." The color drained from her face, but she didn't deny it. That was the most shocking part. The old Delaney, she would have argued, twisted the truth until it fit her version of reality. But this one, she just stood there owning every broken piece. I was stupid, she said, and selfish. I kept waiting for you to explode, to yell, to fight for me. But when you left, it was like you took the air out of the room. No, I said. I just took back the air you never deserved. She flinched. The kind of flinch that says, "This hurts because it's true." I lost everything after you left, she went on. The promotion I was promised? Gone. Turns out the guy wasn't interested once he realized I wasn't leaving you for him. Friends stopped calling. Family asked questions I couldn't answer. And then you disappeared and became this myth. I stayed quiet, let her talk. I wanted to hear it. Not for closure, not for forgiveness, but because I wanted her to finally feel the weight I carried alone. I thought I'd moved on, she admitted. But the second I saw you, Isaiah, it was like someone ripped the last 3 years off me. That name, Isaiah, the way she said it, like she was tasting it again for the first time after forgetting what it meant. It didn't land the way she expected. I didn't soften. I didn't reach out. I just stood there, grounded in the man I had become. You're not the only one who lost something, I said. But you had a choice. I didn't. I know, she whispered. We stood there side by side under a cold sky. Below us, the gala buzzed on. Glasses clinked. Small talk flowed. Fake laughter echoed. But up here, it was just us. The past, the silence, the truths we never said out loud. She wiped her cheek, and only then did I realize a tear had slipped down her face. Why didn't you ever reach out? She asked. Because I finally loved myself more than I hated you. And with that, I walked back inside, leaving her standing alone on that terrace, holding the weight of everything she never expected to lose. I didn't look back when I re-entered the ballroom. I didn't need to. I could feel her still standing there behind the glass, unsure whether to follow or vanish like I once did. The moment had flipped on her. 3 years ago, I was the one evaporating in silence. Now she was frozen in it. Inside, I picked up a bourbon from a tray, took a slow sip, and leaned against a column near the far wall. No one noticed me. That was the beauty of it. I used to be the man who shook every hand, remembered every face, managed every deal. Now I was the quiet storm in the corner, the one nobody expected but couldn't ignore once they realized he was there. I watched her from across the room as she stepped back inside. Her expression had changed. The calculated polish she always wore to these events had slipped. Her eyes scanned the crowd like she was looking for a way out. But there was none. Not from herself. Not tonight. I saw Harold Griggs approach her, a VP at the firm. Slick back hair, fake sincerity in every syllable. He didn't know our history, not all of it, but he knew enough. He gave me a curious glance when Delaney whispered something and abruptly walked away, brushing past him like he was a shadow. Harold watched her go, then looked at me and I saw it click. He remembered me not as a story, as a ghost turned flesh. He didn't say a word, just gave me the kind of nod men give each other when they know the conversation would be too messy for public ears. I didn't come here to gloat. That wasn't the point. Truthfully, I wasn't even supposed to be here. I had flown in on short notice to meet a potential partner for a startup I'd been mentoring out west. They invited me to the gala last minute as a quiet observer. I planned to stay for 20 minutes, smile, leave, but fate has a sick sense of humor. Delaney made her way toward me again, this time slower, measured, like she just accepted something inside herself that she could no longer run from. She stood beside me without asking and said quietly, "I lied to everyone about why you left, even to myself." I didn't respond. I let her keep going. I wanted to know how deep her self-reflection went. I told people you had a breakdown, that you couldn't handle the pressure, that you walked out because you were unstable. I even told my parents you might have been seeing someone else. She admitted it made it easier for them to feel sorry for me to feel less exposed. I turned toward her finally. "So, you rewrote the ending of our marriage to make yourself the victim?" She nodded. No excuses. No rehearsed justification. It was cowardly. No, I said. It was cruel and calculated. You didn't just cheat on me, Delaney. You buried me while I was still breathing. She looked down, and for once, she didn't try to argue. Her fingers fidgeted with the band of her bracelet, the same one I had given her for our 5th anniversary. It was tarnished now, just like everything else between us. I thought you'd come back eventually, she said. That you were just trying to scare me. That once you cooled down, you'd show up and yell or cry or something. I almost did, I admitted, twice. Once when I saw your birthday post and realized you'd gone to our cabin with someone else. And another time when my mom ran into you and told me you looked thin but still beautiful. Like heartbreak made you artistic or something. She winced. I didn't go with him. I went alone. I thought maybe I'd feel close to you there. I laughed under my breath. You should have thought of that before you invited another man into our bed. I never brought him into our home after that night, she said quickly. After you left. I don't care. I cut in. I'm not here for your cleanup crew, Delaney. This isn't confession. I didn't come to forgive. I came because life put us in the same room again. And I decided I wouldn't leave it without looking you in the eye. She stared at me, searching for something in my face. Crack, a flicker of old love. But there was none left, just peace. And maybe that was what hurt her the most, that I'd found peace without her. I'm sorry, she whispered. I nodded. That's a start. But it's not for me anymore. She didn't cry then. Not fully. But her eyes glossed over, and her mouth trembled like she couldn't hold her past in her body anymore. I don't know who I am without you, she said quietly. That's because you never tried to be someone with me. You just used me to hide from yourself. A string quartet began playing in the background. Laughter echoed from the far side of the ballroom. The world had resumed spinning, but she was still stuck, grasping at a version of us that no longer existed, and I was already letting go. Delaney didn't follow me when I left the ballroom again. This time, I walked out into the corridor near the lower lounge. The music faded behind me. The laughter became distant, and I leaned against a marble pillar beneath a painting I vaguely remembered from my old office visits. It was a Jackson Hammond original. Abstract, jagged, cold. It always reminded me of her, even back then, before the cracks in our marriage had turned into canyons. I hadn't planned for any of this. I wasn't here to rekindle, to punish, to reclaim. I just existed in that space and that night like a storm cloud that had outgrown its thunder. 3 years ago, I would have given anything to hear her say sorry, to see her eyes shimmer with regret. And now that it had happened, all I felt was stillness. It's strange, isn't it? How closure doesn't come wrapped in fire and fury like you imagine. Comes in soft glances, missed opportunities, and the silence that follows when you no longer need someone to explain why they did what they did. I watched a couple walk past me, arms linked, laughing about something only they understood. I used to look like that with Delaney. We had our moments. Coffee at dawn before either of us checked emails. Road trips with no itinerary. The dumb arguments about which song was ours. But all of that disappeared the moment I saw that message on her screen. It wasn't even the infidelity that broke me. It was the betrayal of trust so deep I couldn't see a version of reality where we existed afterward. The truth is I had loved her in the way you love a storm. Passionately, foolishly, blindly. I ignored the signs. I forgave inconsistencies. I even questioned my own worth when she withdrew, thinking maybe I wasn't interesting enough anymore. Maybe I wasn't ambitious enough, handsome enough, desirable enough. She never said it outright, but you can always tell when someone's already started imagining their life without you. Her absence began long before she ever touched another man. And when I left, I didn't just disappear from our marriage. I disappeared from everything that reminded me of her. I changed apartments, canceled subscriptions, gave away furniture. I deleted old playlists and photos. I even stopped going to the grocery store where she'd once kissed me in aisle 7 because she thought I looked cute holding a pineapple. I erased the version of myself that loved her because that man had no armor. The man I became afterward was something else entirely. In those years of silence, I rebuilt. I started working with a company that gave me purpose beyond profit margins and client dinners. I invested in a mentorship program for kids without fathers. Spoke at 2 universities. Started writing again, something I hadn't done since college. And slowly, I found parts of myself I hadn't realized I'd lost while trying to fit into the mold of the man she said she wanted. I was no longer Isaiah Merritt, the husband begging for attention in his own home. I became Isaiah Merritt, the man who didn't need to be seen to feel real. The click of heels pulled me back. I didn't need to look. I knew it was her. She stood behind me for a while before speaking. "You changed." I had to. "You were always strong," she said. "You just never saw it." "No," I replied. "I was always soft. There's a difference." Delaney stepped beside me, but not too close. She was careful now, like someone approaching a wild animal she used to keep as a pet. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "You can ask," I said flatly. "If I had told you the truth that night, if I had admitted everything instead of lying, would you have stayed?" I turned to her slowly, and for a moment, I thought about it. Really thought about it. Not because I was tempted, but because I owed it to myself to understand how far I'd come. "No," I said, looking her in the eyes. "Because honesty after betrayal isn't love. It's damage control." She nodded, her lips trembling again. "I deserved that." "You deserved a lot more than what you gave yourself permission to become," I said. "You were better than that once." She looked away, and I knew that landed harder than any insult ever could. It wasn't an attack. It was a mirror, and she didn't like her reflection. "What happens now?" she asked, her voice smaller. "You go home," I said, "and you stop looking for me in rooms I no longer belong to." "And you?" "I left years ago, Delaney. I just happened to walk back into the room tonight." She reached into her purse, pulled out something, and handed it to me. A letter, folded neatly, edges worn like she'd touched it too many times. "I wrote this after you left. I never sent it. I wasn't brave enough. I thought maybe you could read it someday." I took it without expression, slid it into my jacket pocket, not because I wanted to read it, but because I knew it was the final act she needed to perform to stop carrying the weight. Then I smiled. Not cruelly, not triumphantly, just peacefully. "Goodbye, Delaney." And this time she said nothing. She just stood there, arms at her sides. As I turned and walked away down the corridor toward the elevator, my reflection caught in the mirrored wall. The man I saw wasn't bitter, wasn't broken. He was whole. And she stayed behind in the same place I'd once been, surrounded by noise, yet completely alone. After that cold farewell, the night wore on in a blurred haze of fleeting smiles and empty congratulations from strangers who never knew the storm behind my calm. I retreated to a shadowed corner of the grand building's atrium, where dim lights flickered on polished surfaces and whispered of secrets long kept. The letter Delaney had given me earlier that night had been tucked away in my jacket pocket, its creases like scars from a wound that had never properly healed. Alone, amidst the gentle hum of conversation and clinking glasses, I finally found the stillness to unseal its fragile envelope and read the words that had been left unsaid for so long. The letter was written in a hand both deliberate and unsteady, each stroke of ink carrying the burden of a life once intertwined with mine. Delaney confessed in it the slow unraveling of her own identity, how she had built walls to hide from the guilt that gnawed at her every morning, and how her desperate attempts to fill the void I had left behind only magnified her loneliness. In those raw, painful paragraphs, she recounted memories of a time when laughter had been untainted by deceit, a time when we were merely two hopeful souls navigating a future full of promises. She detailed the moments when she had felt most alive, juxtaposed with the crushing nights when remorse had driven her to self-doubt. There was a confession of betrayal, yes, but also an admission of the profound regret for the lies that had become the mortar of the crumbling foundation of our marriage. I could read the subtle shifts in her tone as she described the man I once was, the man who had been both her anchor and her storm, and the man she was desperate to capture, even if only in memory. That admission, written with both reluctance and remorse, felt like a confession, not just of her actions, but of her entire life lived in the shadow of choices that could never be undone. The weight of her words pulled me back to a time when vulnerability was our shared language. It stirred old ghosts in the dim corridors of my mind. I remembered the first time I truly admired her. A quiet afternoon in early spring, the kind of day when the world seemed to expand just a bit, holding its breath as we carved our lives together amid laughter, shared dreams, and whispered hopes. In those recollections, I saw her not as the broken woman who had haunted last night's corridors at the gala, but as the vibrant Delaney who had once dared to dream of a love that could rewrite fate. Yet, as I read, a difficult truth settled into me like an irrevocable stone. The very essence of our shared past was irreparably changed by choices made under duress and fear. I began to wonder if the reconciliation of our memories was ever meant to be a balm or just a reminder of what we lost. There, in that solitary moment, I realized that some doors, once shut, create spaces both for regret and the possibility of transformation, a silent invitation to change that could either propel us forward or leave us marooned in a sea of what-ifs. As I closed the letter, the ambient noise of the gala seemed suddenly distant, replaced by an inner dialogue I had long avoided. What if forgiveness wasn't about renewing the lost chapters, but about understanding the impermanence of our chosen roles? The realization was as heavy as it was liberating. I now understood that while Delaney's words had cracked open a door to raw, unfiltered truth, they did not come with a key that could lead us back to what we once were. Instead, they reminded me that even the most insurmountable heartbreak can be transmuted into insight if only we are brave enough to acknowledge our shadows. In that dark yet unexpectedly serene corner, as I let the final echoes of her confession mingle with the quiet throb of my own heartbeat, I accepted that reconciliation wasn't about mending broken connections, but about honoring the lessons learned from them. There was no dramatic twist or sudden burst of resolution in that silent chamber. Only a slow, lingering understanding that some wounds, while never fully healing, can eventually guide us towards a wiser, more honest future. With the letter clutched in one hand and a new understanding dawning in the other, I stepped out of the atrium into the cool embrace of the night, knowing that the past, though a relentless echo, had finally allowed me to shape a future that belonged solely to the man I had become. The walk back to my hotel was longer than I remembered, though I'd walked that part of the city countless times when Delaney and I were still married. But that was before everything changed, before familiar streets turned foreign. Tonight, though, it didn't feel unfamiliar. It felt reclaimed, like I was finally walking these sidewalks as myself. Not as someone half-swallowed by another person's betrayal, but as someone who had tasted silence, endured loneliness, and survived it. I passed storefronts that used to mean something to us. There was the cafe where she once surprised me with cupcakes on my birthday because I told her I hated cake. The bookstore where she used to spend hours browsing titles, pretending to be deep, though she rarely finished anything she started, books or relationships. The Thai restaurant where we had our first argument, not over something big, but over whether or not she had been truly listening when I told her about a dream I had. I remembered how she brushed it off, called it just a dream, and moved on. Looking back now, that moment told me everything. She was always listening just enough to respond, never enough to understand. The hotel lobby was quiet when I entered. Marble floors, dim chandeliers, a front desk clerk too bored to look up. I took the elevator to the 12th floor, stepped into the suite, and closed the door behind me. I stood there in the silence. No TV, no city sounds, just the letter still folded in my pocket, and my reflection staring back at me from the window. I pulled off the jacket, loosened the tie, poured a glass of water, and sat at the small desk by the window. The city lights below blinked like nervous stars. That's when I reached for my phone, not to call anyone, not even to check messages, just to scroll through the contacts I hadn't touched in years. Her name was still in there, Delaney Merritt. No photo, just the name. The same name I watched tremble on her chest tonight as she wore that badge like armor she didn't believe in anymore. For a long moment, my thumb hovered over the delete button. I didn't press it, not because I wanted to call her, not because I had any plans to reach out, but because I needed to remember. Not her, not the woman she became, but the lesson the gravity of knowing what happens when you give too much of yourself to someone who only offers fragments in return. I'd spent too long in that space, chasing her validation, her presence, her version of commitment. I remembered nights where I'd lie awake wondering if she was really working late. I remembered making her tea, waiting up for her, only for her to come home tired, distracted, and unwilling to touch me. And I remembered how instead of questioning it, I started blaming myself. Maybe I wasn't exciting enough. Maybe I was too quiet. Maybe I needed to dress sharper, smile more, bring up topics she liked. But that was the trap. That was the hook of betrayal that sinks in long before the affair begins. It's not the physical act that shatters you. It's the months of being made to feel small without understanding why. And tonight proved it. The way she looked at me, shocked, unraveled, barely able to breathe, was the same way I had looked at myself in the mirror 3 years ago after walking out that door, except I stayed gone and I rebuilt. She, on the other hand, remained frozen in the version of herself that believed she could have it all without paying the cost. I slept surprisingly well that night. No tossing, no vivid dreams, just rest. I woke up to a sunrise that spilled through the tall hotel windows like a soft declaration. I brewed coffee, black, and sat down again at the desk, the folded letter still there beside my phone. I reread it not because I needed to, but because I wanted to understand something deeper. Did she truly regret what she did? Or did she regret who she lost because of it? The difference mattered. There's a unique kind of pain in realizing you were someone's lesson, not their forever. But there's also peace in knowing you were the part of their story they'll never be able to rewrite. She can tell people she saw me again. She can say I was calm, well-dressed, collected. She can even lie and say I was kind. But what she won't be able to fake is what she felt when she realized I was no longer hers. That panic, that regret, that single, sharp awareness that the man she took for granted had evolved beyond her reach. And as I finished the last sip of my coffee and packed my bag for the airport, I smiled, not with pride, but with closure. The kind that doesn't scream or need to be validated. The kind that feels like a quiet door closing behind you while sunlight hits your back and reminds you that yes, you made it out. And you didn't just survive. You became. The flight home was quiet. No delays, no turbulence. Just the hum of an aircraft carrying me away from a night I hadn't planned and a past that had, without permission, caught up to me. I stared out the window for most of it, letting the clouds drift by while the letter sat in my bag, unread for a third time. I had memorized parts of it already, not because I wanted to, but because some things stick when they come from someone who once mattered too much. Back in my apartment, I didn't unpack right away. I didn't scroll through emails or check voicemails. I just stood in the middle of the living room and let the silence hold me. The kind of silence I used to be afraid of. The kind that used to echo. But now it felt different. Felt earned. That night I went for a walk. No destination. No music in my ears. Just the rhythm of my own footsteps. I passed strangers, watched their lives play out in fragments. Laughter from a balcony. An argument near a corner deli. Someone crying alone in their car. Life, as it always does, just kept moving. And maybe that's the most honest thing about healing. It's not loud. It doesn't come with applause. It's a quiet decision you make over and over again to keep walking even when your past begs you to stop. Somewhere during that walk, I found myself outside a bookstore I hadn't been to in years. Without thinking, I stepped inside. The smell of paper, ink, and old wood was like a memory too soft to hurt. I browsed aimlessly until I landed on a journal, blank, leather-bound, waiting. I bought it not because I needed it, but because something inside me knew it was time to start writing a new chapter. One that wasn't about her, one that wasn't about loss, one that was just about me. A week passed before I opened the journal. It sat on my nightstand like a promise I wasn't quite ready to make. Every time I reached for it, a whisper of the past would drift in. Her voice, her apology, the ache of what we used to be. But then one morning, as sunlight filtered through the blinds and painted gold across the floor, I picked it up. I opened to the first page, and instead of writing about her, I wrote about me. I wrote about the man I had become. Not the man who had been left. Not the man who disappeared, but the man who stayed true to himself when it would have been easier to lose everything and call it fate. I wrote about the nights I cried without shame, the mornings I got up anyway. I wrote about how healing doesn't always feel heroic. Sometimes it's just making dinner for one and not feeling lonely. Sometimes it's laughing without checking who's watching. Sometimes it's walking past the places that used to hurt and realizing they don't anymore. And in the pages that followed, I didn't mention her name. Not because I was bitter, but because she was no longer the center of my story. That was the shift I hadn't noticed happening. I had stopped defining myself by the people who walked away and started defining myself by the man who stayed. Weeks went by, then months, and one day I ran into someone at a cafe. A woman with kind eyes, an old book in her hand, and a habit of laughing with her whole face. We didn't talk about the past. We didn't compare scars. We just talked slowly, honestly, like two people who had been broken before but didn't need saving now. Delaney never reached out again, and I never expected her to. Maybe she finally understood that some people are meant to teach you how to lose so you can learn how to find yourself. I don't regret loving her. I regret staying too long after the love had turned to silence. But that's behind me now because healing isn't about forgetting what happened. It's about remembering who you are, even when someone tried to convince you that you weren't enough. And if you're reading this now, wondering if you'll ever feel whole again after being betrayed or abandoned, I'll say this, you will. You'll wake up one day and not miss them. You'll hear their name and feel nothing. You'll sit across from someone new and realize you never needed to be rescued. You just needed time to return to yourself. And when that moment comes, when you finally feel free, you'll understand the truth I learned standing on that terrace the night she cried. The strongest thing you can ever do is walk away from what doesn't see your worth and never look back.